We're going.
All right. Well, welcome back, everyone. This is Two Beards in a Bible. I'm John Swano.
I'm Dave Tenney.
And we are in Acts chapter 20 tonight. Today, or whatever it is.
I was talking to lady at Worcester, Eileen, and she's been listening to our podcast. And I said, she says, why do you call him Johnny? Oh. She asked me that. I said, well, I've tried to call him John too, but I don't know why. Here's Johnny.
Yeah, I'll answer to any of them. Yes. Doesn't bother me. When I was a kid, I wanted to be called John, and I guess most of the time still am. But my mom was always telling me, I named you Jonathan. I'd prefer that you go by Jonathan. And I that never stuck. But I'm okay with it.
Yeah, so my mother and my wife and my sister call me David, but nobody else does. Everybody else calls me Dave, so.
Yeah, there's a brother at Medina that you know, Ed.
Yeah.
And his name is actually Edgar, but you can't call him any other form of Ed, Edwin.
Yes,
or Edward.
Because it's Edgar.
Yeah, he gets kind of funny with you.
He gets touchy about it. I work with a guy named Gerald, and if you call him Jerry, he doesn't like that.
Right.
He hates that. So, hey, you'll have that.
Yep. Well, anyways, hi, Eileen.
Yes.
And we hope you're still listening.
Yes. All right, so we're in Acts chapter 20, and last week we talked about all of the crazy things that happened at Ephesus, and there was the big riot. And as we pick up in chapter 20, and I think we covered this first verse in the last episode, where Paul called all the disciples to himself and embraced them, and because of all of the crazy things that happened. So,
right.
I guess, John, you want to read first? And we'll just go ahead and read that verse again and then stop at verse 6.
All right, Acts chapter 20 at verse 1. After the uproar had ceased, Paul called the disciples to himself, embraced them, and departed to go to Macedonia. Now when he had gone over that region and encouraged them with many words, he came to Greece, and stayed 3 months. And when the Jews plotted against him as he was about to sail to Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. And Sopater of Berea accompanied him to Asia. Also Aristarchus and Secundus of the Thessalonians, and Gaius of Derbe, and Timothy and Tychicus and Trophimus of Asia. These men, going ahead, waited for us at Troas, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days joined them at Troas, where we stayed 7 days.
You know what? I made you read
first. You
just
wanted me to read those names.
I did.
The only one that really got me was that Sopater. That Sopater.
Sopater. Yeah,
I'm not sure how to say that one. But.
I think was a pretty common name back then too. So he's going through these areas, and it's in Greece. And one of the areas, one of the major towns in this area that he's at is Corinth. Mm-hmm. So Paul wrote 2 letters to the Corinthians. So that's kind of seeing where these things took place. I have some other scriptures I wrote down that we could look at if we wanted to, but Luke doesn't give a whole lot of detail about what happened here. Mm-hmm. But Paul in 2 Corinthians gives a few more details. So you look up 2 Corinthians 7, 4 through 7, and I'll look up the other one, which is 2 Corinthians
7.
I'm going to read first.
Go ahead.
2 Corinthians 2, 12 and 13. It says, Paul says here, he says, furthermore, when I came to Troas to preach Christ's gospel, and a door was opened to me by the Lord, I had no rest in my spirit, because I did not find Titus my brother, but taking my leave of them, I departed for Macedonia. So this, if you read the first verse here in Acts chapter 20, he says, he called everybody together and embraced them and departed to go to Macedonia. Mm-hmm. So this is Paul's account there of that. So there's another one here John's going to read.
So 2 Corinthians 7 at verse 4 beginning. And you said to verse 7. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Great is my boldness of speech toward you. Great is my boasting on your behalf. I am filled with comfort. I am exceedingly joyful in all our tribulation. For indeed, when we came to Macedonia, our bodies had no rest, but we were troubled on every side. Outside were conflicts, inside were fears. Nevertheless, God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus. And not only by his coming, but also by the consolation with which he was comforted in you, when he told us of your earnest desire, your mourning, your zeal for me, so that I rejoiced even more.
So that just gives us, I guess, Paul's account of these few verses here that we read.
Right.
And sometimes that can kind of let us know a little bit more. The other thing that's in here is that, Paul was collecting money here to take to Jerusalem, because the church at Jerusalem was having all kinds of, I think there was a famine in the land at that time. So that was one of the other things that, and we don't have to go there, but 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verse 1 through 5, talks about that. That's about the giving of the Corinthians to that. Do you have that?
No.
Okay. Go to chapter 8 and verse 1 through 5. 2 Corinthians 8.
Moreover, brethren, we make known to you the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia, that in a great trial of affliction the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. For I bear witness that according to their ability, yes, and beyond their ability, they were freely willing, imploring us with much urgency that we would receive the gift and the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And not only as we had hoped, but they first gave themselves to the Lord, and then to us by the will of God. So we urged Titus that as he had begun, so he would also complete this grace in you as well. But as you abound in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in all diligence, and in your love for us, see that you abound in this grace also. I speak not by commandment, but I am testing the sincerity of your love by the diligence of others.
All right. So, all right, John, now I got a question for you.
Okay.
Put you on the spot.
All right.
So, we read all of these hard to pronounce names.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you, so in light of that Paul's got this money that he's been collecting, why would he have all these men go along with him?
Well, to fend off any accusations of wrongdoing, or we see in the religious world and the political world today, somebody's always got their fingers in the cookie jar.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, or at least that's what I think as well.
It's wisdom.
It is.
Even among the local churches, after the service, when the collection is taken up, I would venture to guess, every place I've ever been, but I would venture to guess that in most places, 2 men go in and count the money, so that there wouldn't be any kind of talk of wrongdoing.
Yes.
So.
Yep. Yeah, so I think that's what was going on there. Mm-hmm. And that's all the water I could squeeze out of that.
Well, I might be able to squeeze a little bit more, because as we, one of the things, I guess we're kind of talking about it, but one of the things that keeps jumping up out of the pages and biting me in these passages is the care that they had one for another, and the idea that they were together. And what was it back in Acts? We read about him staying, Paul staying for 3 months.
Yeah, when in Ephesus, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and where was that? Was that in Ephesus? Yeah. Now, when he had gone over to that region and encouraged, he departed to go to Macedonia. Now, when he had gone over that region and encouraged them with many words, he came to Greece and stayed 3 months, and was about to sail to Syria. But anyway, he stayed with the brethren for 3 months and helped spur them on and teach them and so on. And they were exceedingly joyful. In 2 Corinthians 7, verse 4, great is my boldness of speech towards you, great is my boasting on your behalf. I am filled with comfort, I am exceedingly joyful in all our tribulations. So they had tough times, but they got through it.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of the things for us to remember, we don't just show up at the church building on a Sunday morning because we shouldn't at least show up at the church building on a Sunday morning for a selfish reason of, even if I know that it's commanded that I have to assemble with the saints on the first day of the week, the idea of just showing up because, I have to check my checkbox and I need to do this for me so that my soul is safe.
Yeah.
We're doing so much more than that.
Yep.
We're there to be built up. It's no mistake that the Lord has commanded his people to come together like this so that they might build each other up and help each other through trials and tribulations and in the end be joyful about the whole thing.
Yeah. When we read those passages in 2 Corinthians, Paul talked about his distress.
Yeah.
And no doubt, when you read these accounts in Acts, I don't think you always get, these are real people that are going through these horrible things.
Yeah.
And it had to have been stressful. Had to have been really, really tough on them. So
Yeah.
And probably really made those bonds that they had even closer.
Yeah. In verse 2 of 2 Corinthians 8, that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded in the riches of their liberality. So they didn't have anything, but they still gave what they had. They shared and they made sure that everyone got through the difficult time. So, there's a lot to think about there.
Yes.
I don't know that we can say it all, but everyone go and read through these and just think about that for a little bit.
All right. We probably end this episode on this next set of scriptures that we're going to talk about. Okay, so I'm going to read here starting in verse 7. It says, Now on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. There were many lamps in the upper room where they were gathered together. And in a window sat a certain young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep, and he was overcome by sleep. And as Paul continued speaking, he fell down from the third story and was taken up dead. But Paul went down, fell on him, and embracing him said, Do not trouble yourselves, for his life is in him. Now when he had come up and broken bread and eaten and talked a while, even till daybreak he departed. And they brought the young man in alive, and they were not a little comforted. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So there's the authority we get not to preach long sermons, right?
But it sounds like Paul preached a pretty long time, right?
Yeah, right. And that's always that's the running joke. We're going to preach till midnight.
Yeah.
And
the other one is this is what I always heard is it said Paul preached till midnight, but it didn't say he started at 11:30.
Right.
But that let's not focus on that just yet.
Right.
So let's go back to verse 7.
All right.
Where it says, On the first day of the week, the disciples came together to break bread. So let's kind of talk about those things. So, the first day of the week, what is that?
It's Sunday.
Sunday. Now, it's interesting here. This is one of the very few times where Luke specifies a day.
Yeah.
Right. He made it a point to specify that this was the first day of the week.
Must be a reason for that.
There had to have been a reason. Because, how many other days does he talk about? But here he specifies that this was the first day of the week.
Yeah.
You got something in there?
No, I'm just rifling through a couple of pages here. But that is something that is often, even though it says it right there, there are those religious groups that will say, well, I know it's busy on Sundays and it's the only day that people have to stay home and make pancakes with the family. So why don't you just come on over on Saturday night and we'll have a service? And that puts you into a dangerous territory.
Right.
I mean, I don't, it's not the Lord's church that would ever do that.
Hopefully
but
not.
you know.
Yeah, but the first day of the week, I mean, this is one of those places, and there's a few other ones that specify that this is when Christians tended to meet. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2, I believe. So let me look at that. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. That's really easy to find here. It says, now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must do also. On the first day of the week, let each one of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper. But it's another time where the first day of the week is specified as the time that Christians came together.
Yeah.
And you know, what are some of the other things that happened on the first day of the week?
Well, there would be singing, there would be praying, there would be reading of the scriptures and study.
Well, historically, what's something big that happened on the first day of the week?
All right, I'm drawing a blank.
Jesus rose from the dead, right,
you.
on a Sunday.
Yeah.
When the disciples were gathered in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 1 and 2, that was a Sunday. The first sermon was preached on a Sunday.
Right. And in the account in Acts, you know, is the day of Pentecost. That can be narrowed down to be exactly
the
first day of the week.
It can be.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's all those clues there for a reason.
Yeah.
And we can't lose sight of that.
Yep. The other thing is, it says that they came together. Mm-hmm. You know, so that's it's indicating that there was a gathering. And why did they come together?
To break bread.
Now, was this just having lunch?
No. This would be the Lord's Supper, as was prescribed by the Lord.
Yep, absolutely. So, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and verse 20, kind of expounds upon that.
I'm going to go ahead and read. Zur here kind of speaks to that. It says the word break is from the same Greek word as it is in other places, regardless of whether a common meal is meant or that of the Lord's Supper. The connection must determine in each case as to what sense is used. In the present passage, it could not mean a common meal, for the disciples would not come together for that purpose. They went from house to house in Acts chapter 2:46. You know, likewise, they would not have done so, especially on the Lord's Day, more than on some other day. You know, the conclusion is then that it means the Lord's Supper.
Yeah. Another passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 20, in that whole section there, the disciples there at Corinth had turned the Lord's Supper into a common meal.
Right.
And he says here, therefore, when you come together in one place, same language, he says, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. For in eating, each one takes his own supper ahead of others. So Paul in here is indicating that when they came together on the first day of the week, they were partaking of the Lord's Supper. It's just another indicator of what was going on.
Right, and he's kind of admonishing them there. I mean, I had trouble wrapping my head around these verses. I know it's just plain as day when you just stop and read it, but you know, he's not saying straightforward. Therefore, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper. It's not saying that you don't come together to eat the Lord's Supper. He's like, but when you guys are doing it, you're not doing that.
Yeah.
You're eating a common meal.
Yeah, you're supposed to be doing this, but you're coming together and you're not doing what you're supposed to do. That's what he's saying.
Yeah, there's some inflection that would have to be in those words. You know, that's sarcasm.
Yeah. Therefore, when you come together in one place, it is not to eat the Lord's Supper.
Right.
That it's kind of, and then after that, he talks about conduct in the Lord's Supper. So we know that.
It's the context.
It's the context.
And that makes verse 22 makes all the more sense when it says, what? Do you not have houses to eat and drink in? So why aren't you doing that stuff there?
Yeah.
So that's...
And then verse 23 he says, for I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus on the same night which he was betrayed took bread, and broke it and gave thanks. And he broke it and said, "Take this, eat this. My body is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." So now he goes and talks about what the Lord's Supper is. He explains what it is and its purpose.
Right.
So,
yeah. And that's where, many times people that give into this social gospel that want to say that, that want to use the church as a social club. And it's easy to do because when we come together, aren't we not social with one another?
Right.
I enjoy the interaction that I have with the saints, every day before and after the services. But that is something to certainly keep in mind at the top of our mind as we're preparing to go there and as we are there, that we're not there to socialize.
Right.
It's going to happen as a result of us being together, but we need to be serious about our purpose of conducting worship in the manner that the Lord has prescribed.
Absolutely. So that's kind of I guess when I read that, when I go back to Acts chapter 20, verse 8, it says, on the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, that's their purpose. Mm-hmm. He says, now Paul, ready to depart the next day, spoke to them and continued his message until midnight. So here we can see two things that the early church is doing when they got together.
Yeah.
One is they're observing the Lord's Supper. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is they're hearing a message.
Right.
Or they're hearing the Word of God taught.
Right.
Now, we have this tradition where we have like a sermon on Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. But that's really, that's just a format. Mm-hmm. Like you could just have a Bible class instead of a sermon. You could do it multiple ways.
Right.
At least that's my feeling on it.
I'd have to think about that. It's hard to separate from, whether or not it's something that we have just become accustomed to. It's. I guess we have somewhat of a precedent here for Paul spoke to them.
Yeah, and he had a message
and continued his message.
Yeah,
until midnight.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you could certainly involve study. Yeah, I don't know. That's probably not something to dig too deeply on.
Yeah. The thing to notice is there was some teaching going on.
Right.
In whatever format that took place in, because if you think about most sermons that are preached, they're lessons.
Yeah.
Right. It's teaching. So there's different formats you could teach in. I
was telling you about the study that I was involved in, at least online. I was listening to a study last night, and that particular teacher, had the people in the audience that were there interact. He was having them do some reading, and he would ask a question, and they would answer. But he was still, in the confines of his lesson.
Yeah. When Paul went and he went to Greece and he taught, and the men of Athens, he was preaching, but he was interacting with those that were there. So I guess what I'm saying is, traditionally we have a guy who stands up and he gives a sermon and everybody listens.
Right.
I'd say that's a tradition we have. It's not the only way you can do it.
And depending on the place. The elders at one place might desire to be a little bit more formal.
Yeah, they might.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And then there are those that just because of where you are, there's not in some places in the world, there's just not that ability to be so formal.
I think it's harder with a huge group.
Yeah.
If you've got 100 plus people, it makes it more difficult to be interactive.
Right. And in a larger group like that, it becomes kind of necessary to have a formality and a plan.
Yeah, because if you've got 20 people, it can be more free flowing. Right. It doesn't have to be as rigid because,
right.
But
there's God put an order to His creation, and He has an order in His church, and as we come together, there should be some semblance of order.
Yeah, absolutely.
In regards to that, we have to be serious about the things that God is serious about.
And I'm not saying that we shouldn't have any order.
No. And I'm not saying you're saying that.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, it's, it can be, the teaching, preaching part can be done in different ways.
Yeah.
And still satisfy that.
Yeah.
So I guess that's one of those things that's left to judgment.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
And that's you just have to talk it through, just like we just did.
Yeah.
This is one of those areas where there's not going to be a right answer.
Right.
That is right for everybody in every moment. There's the right answer, and these are the things you must do because it's prescribed by the Lord. It's pretty clear the avenues of worship that He expects from His people when they come together.
Right.
But other than that, the exact format. Like I know people that I know people in particular that I'm thinking of, but I know that in the past some have gotten worked up over whether or not the Lord's Supper was before the lesson or after the lesson, or how many songs were between the Lord's Supper and the collection.
Or did you sing all 4 verses?
Right.
I've had people say, well, you shouldn't skip a verse.
And there shouldn't be blue carpet in the church because it needs to be red like the blood of Christ. You can go down so many avenues with useless things to bicker about.
Yes, absolutely.
But
we know from this that they met together.
Yeah.
From this one passage, and there are other passages we can study to see some of the other things they did, like praying and singing and those and giving. We mentioned that one.
Yeah.
But here we see teaching and partaking of the Lord's Supper.
Yeah.
Now, this whole thing, I think this whole thing took place.
As a preacher, I need to point out that
Yes.
just because Eutychus fell asleep, that doesn't constitute authority to fall asleep while I'm preaching.
John, I think this is a comforting thing because I have had people fall asleep while I've been given a lesson, and I figure I'm not near a speaker Paul was, so it can't be me. So
yeah, there is that. It does remind us that the brethren in the first century were human beings as well.
Yes.
And who knows what happened earlier in the day. He noticed that when he fell out of the window and fell asleep, Paul didn't say, well, he deserves that one. He was concerned and went down and helped him.
Well, here's the thing. It says there were many lamps. So what does fire eat? Oxygen.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, okay, so here's the situation. It's in the evening. All of these people probably worked all day.
Yeah.
There's the oxygen's maybe kind of a little low because there's all these lamps burning. I could see how somebody could get tired.
I never thought of that wrinkle in that. That's some good thinking right there.
I underlined the lamps because of that. Because I was like, I got to remember to tell John about that.
Hand me my red pen over there.
There you go. Your red marking implement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You gave me this. I'm wearing it out.
So I think, and that's another thing is, so it seems like these people met on the first day of the week, but they didn't meet in the morning. They met in the evening. Mm-hmm. And that satisfies what we're supposed to do as well.
Right.
We don't necessarily have to meet in the morning. Now, if I had it my way, we'd be meeting at like 7 in the morning on Sunday morning. But not everybody wants to do that. So
I would be one of them.
Yeah, and you would be one of them. Yes.
Yeah, that's for many years. The church that we attended, Bible study was at 10, and then the services were at 10:45, and now at Medina it's 9:30.
Yeah,
and we live further away from it as well, so that was an adjustment. To have that extra, basically a half an hour extra that we had to make sure we're on the road. But it was totally doable, and unless some major catastrophe happens with traffic, we're there on time. So it can be done.
I think it depends on the community, what time you start, because I know like in some the church in Worcester is more of a farming community, so they start earlier,
right?
Because people typically get up earlier.
And the standard practice of most religious bodies in the United States of America for the past 75 years has been to have a morning service and an evening service.
Yeah.
And that has been to accommodate those that may be doing shift work
Yep.
and can't work in the morning or can't work in the evening. They can make one of those, and it still satisfies the command to come together on the first day of the week. And so it's just a matter of, it feels weird when we don't have like the evening service.
Yeah.
Because you're just so used to that schedule of things. But just keeping in mind that the Lord commanded that we come together on the first day of the week, and we have some leeway.
Yes, absolutely.
When it comes to making it work for the particular group within the confines of that first day of the week and the other.
So this guy Eutychus, he falls asleep and he falls out of the window and he dies. And Paul revives him. And then at the end there, in verse 11, it says, now when they had come up and broken bread and eaten and talked a while. So did they partake of the Lord's Supper again? Trick question.
Yeah, no. I mean, obviously, no. I knew that.
Yeah.
I wasn't.
And we can tell that because it's the context.
And it even says there, and eaten. Had broken bread and eaten.
Yeah.
So that's, again, as we pointed out earlier, it was not to eat.
Right.
That you come together. So this was obviously something different.
It was for a memorial. So they brought this young man in alive, and it says, and they were not a little comforted. I'm sure they were a lot comforted.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah, and they continued. They stayed there and talked a long while.
Yep. John, we better stop.
Is that enough?
That's
we
enough.
have talked a long while.
Yes, we have. Not till midnight.
Not quite.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for joining in, and we hope to see you next time.